So, some people are calling this the best episode of the entire series for House of the Dragon. Some have gone as far as saying this episode is on the quality level of the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. And maybe it is, maybe it's not. Let's go ahead and break this episode down that is titled Rhaenyra the Cruel. It definitely has some great moments that we'll discuss, and by the end, I'll let you know whether I think this is a great episode and if I too agree that this is the best episode of the entire series so far. I'll start by saying that experiencing the aftermath of the Blood and Cheese event was crucial. I know Blood and Cheese was divisive among book fans, and while I kind of defended what they did there, I admit that I had my own concerns with how this was going to be handled. One issue I have with the source material for House of the Dragon is that Fire and Blood is written in a way that doesn't truly develop much intimacy with these major events or the characters beyond some general commentary. A lot of book fans felt that the impact of Blood and Cheese was missing, but I think this episode handled the fallout very well, and while the impact within the scene of Blood and Cheese may have felt underwhelming, the true impact is all over this episode, and not just for the Greens, but it's also a pivotal moment within the Black Council as well. This episode felt like a true consequence for specifically the murder of Jaehaerys, while compared to the book, and again, it was brutal within the scene itself in the book, the moment comes and goes without much if any reference in the future, definitely not much commentary. I loved how they used Jaehaerys' murder to create inner conflict with not just the Greens, but the Blacks as well. Aegon's reaction while meeting his small council illustrates how little he knows what to do politically. While it is understandable when compared to Rhaenyra, I like that we can clearly see that Rhaenyra is the primary person in the Blacks practicing restraint, and that is far more clear later. While in contrast, Aegon needs to be restrained. A good example is when Blood, one of Jaehaerys' murderers, is captured. Larys is instructed by Otto to retrieve more information, and Aegon literally needs Criston Cole to block his exit. Aegon wants to go murder Blood himself immediately. This scene offers so much. I like that they address what a lot of book fans felt was a plot hole by not having guards posted, because Aegon confronts Criston Cole about this directly, and that'll be a point driven home even more later with Criston and Sir Arik. And this is also a great prelude to a final confrontation between Aegon and Otto. Immediately, Otto goes into the political mind of not wasting a crisis, but also pointing out that Aegon already appears weak, and that they need to use the death of Jaehaerys to their benefit, to vilify Rhaenyra. Otto calls back to last season when Meleys and Rhaenys escaped the dragon pit as an omen. I've seen people call Otto a bad hand, but you can't deny his logic and his strategy here. By setting in motion the plan for the funeral progression to be made into a public spectacle before the small folk, gaining sympathy from the people of King's Landing. People have really applauded Rhys Ifans' acting in this episode, and this is just an appetizer. But hearing this inflection in his tone, he offers multiple levels, and I really like that before Aegon even concedes that this is the right thing to do, Otto makes the order to proceed, demonstrating an authority over the king's wishes. This is a good scene, but a great scene is just ahead of us. And yet, before we get to this showdown between Aegon and Otto, we have really just wonderful moments in between. We do get to see Aegon kill Blood, but this does give the Greens confirmation that Daemon was behind the plot, as that is confirmed and confessed to Larys. And it also reveals to Larys that Blood's partner in crime was a rat catcher. That will matter here in just a little while. But really, I was wowed. That funeral progression, after watching it multiple times, delivers so much more than I first noticed on that first watch. I first complained that I felt like this episode wasn't giving me enough exploration of Helaena, but I kind of take that back. I think this scene demonstrates a full-fledged anxiety attack for her character, while simultaneously sharing this dread with the audience as the carriage carrying Jaehaerys' body gets stuck in the road. It keeps rocking, the small folk grow louder and emotional, and I know I'm not alone when I thought this child's body was going to fall off the carriage, or something even worse, as you can see his head is merely just sewed back on. That's one of those scenes in filmmaking that really makes you sit up or lean back in your couch when you experience it. That is the TV/film medium working at its finest, in my opinion. As for Helena and my complaint of wanting more from her character, the reason I take that back is because I'm trusting that they're taking their time with this character, other characters, the war, and really the entire series. After getting through all of the time jumps, the first season was really hindered in pacing by having to crunch so much history into a single season. While so much of it is not interesting to linger on, we needed those main plot points. To this point, and back to episode 8 of season 1, I feel that House of the Dragon has really established its rhythm, and those issues with pace from season 1 are gone for good, it appears. From episode 8 season 1 to now, every moment feels so much better connected, and season 2 by default already feels like a step up in storytelling from the first season. Alright, I'm going to jump forward here just a little bit into a great scene between Rhaenyra and Daemon. The dialogue here is fantastic. Nobody likes exposition. This is one of those conversations that doesn't lead into directional dialogue, where a character must move forward out of instruction from another character. Things are said directly, and yet they still maintain implicit meaning, where between the lines, even something more is being communicated to your audience. Rhaenyra is angered that Daemon plotted a scheme that ultimately makes her look like a villain to the entire realm, and while he chops this up to a mistake, Rhaenyra calls him out for this selfish desire to seek personal revenge. This moment is really Rhaenyra deconstructing Daemon's character for herself and now for the audience. And I like the way Daemon argues his point because it shows a person saying all the surface level actions and intentions while simultaneously defending himself from being figured out by Rhaenyra. See, I think everything Rhaenyra said is true, but Daemon's intentions are wrapped up into this entitlement and the dues he feels owed that he was never paid, all because he felt overlooked by Viserys, or even seen as a threat from his own brother. And when he says he's off to Harrenhal to take it in Rhaenyra's name, it is true that's what he will do, but those underlying motives are still present, still seeking validation. I mean, that's the whole point of the crab feeder plot in season 1 in a lot of ways. The surface level truth of Daemon's actions are hiding his motives that perhaps he doesn't quite understand yet. And Rhaenyra as a girl could ignore this, but now as a woman, the rightful heir, ripe with the pain of losing her father, a miscarriage, and her son Luke, she can no longer play oblivious to who Daemon has been, and up until this point, he's been grooming her. But there's an interesting moment here for Daemon. I know Team Black and the Rogue Prince fans have felt that the showrunners have a bias against Daemon, and they want to demonize the character. I think there's a very good reason for that narratively. I think they've accomplished the dark side of the morally gray character with Daemon well enough, and I do anticipate for this story and for this character arc, we will begin to see Daemon go through a bit of a coming to Jesus moment here soon. There's this small moment where he approaches Rhaenyra as if he's going to grab at her throat again like he did in season 1, but he restrains himself and more gently brushes her face with his thumb and recites the actions he took to place the crown upon Rhaenyra's brow. That small gesture seems insignificant in the moment, but I think it's a great example of his impulses conflicting with his love for Rhaenyra as well as his own ambitions to seek revenge, where before he took this out on Rhaenyra and choked her. It's small, but that's good. If we get any type of redemption arc for this character, I hate the idea of it being overnight. So again, this show is taking its time and I really appreciate that. Unlike Jaime in the main series, Daemon has no moment where he saved the city of King's Landing that he can use to hold on to, pretending that there's evidence of his honor underneath the Kingslayer Act. Daemon's more starting from scratch in comparison, and I think fans are going to be very pleased to see a new spin on the redemption arc, assuming that's where this is going. Now, if you feel like I skip over anything, I'm really trying to focus on the moments that I think make people find this as a great episode. This is another one of those moments. So here, Criston Cole believes that there is no absolution for what he has done. His guilt is permanent, and he must just live with it. I know people hate Criston Cole, but I do understand where he's coming from here. He doesn't believe the guilt can leave him. He's cursed to break his vows forever, but this time it cost a small child their life, at least in his eyes. And I love the projection onto Ser Arik, and it turns out to have huge consequences. Again, this episode does a really good job at creating tension in the atmosphere of the scene. First with Helena during the funeral progression, but again here with Criston and Ser Arik. It's just two characters dominating a scene. Their tones get hostile, it gets uncomfortable, and the audience knows that this is all just a tactic for Criston Cole to process his guilt by projecting it onto others. He's really just being hypocritical in a lot of ways. It addresses a couple issues from the Blood and Cheese event. Sir Art questions why Queen Helena has not been assigned a sworn sword, and Criston deflects this with pointing out that Sir Aric's brother betrayed the king. Criston Cole uses Sir Aric as a way to process his own guilt in the most despicable way possible. This legendary battle of the Cargyll twins is all just a way for Criston Cole to process his guilt. Now, similar to Daemon, the showrunners have really demonized Criston Cole, but unlike Daemon, I really don't know where they're taking this. George R.R. Martin likes to write characters that are not entirely heroic, but also not entirely evil. But he also wrote the character Ramsay and Joffrey, so we'll see where this goes. But I love this scene for Criston Cole. I like what brought him to this moment, and it's an even better scene because of where it leads. I hope there's a reflection for this for Criston in the future episodes, as he realizes he sent Sir Aric to his death. Now, we do get some insight with the character Hugh the Hammer, and it does extend more insight into the dire situation with the small folk and expresses to us the price of this war. It's creating desperation among those who have nothing to do with this conflict. I like that they're establishing the character Hugh, and they offer us another extra scene with Alan of Hall, but now we're also introduced to his brother Adam. I've said this before, and you may not be as excited to see these characters if you haven't read the book, but as you continue watching House of the Dragon, you'll come back to these scenes and look at them much differently upon rewatches. They're not showing Hugh or Adam and Alan of Hall for no reason, and I'll just leave it at that, because I don't want to spoil anything for you. So we go from scenes there with the small folk, smaller characters that at the time seem inconsequential, but it does segue into another scene here that shows Corlys and Rhaenys snuggled next to each other. And while their dialogue is not insignificant, what's more important is that we actually see their relationship. I do think this is more important than their actual conversation. The relationship in this scene paired with others in the second half of season 1 are necessary. All of these characters serve a bigger purpose than we've seen yet, and I like that the show has found practical ways to get them screen time that helps move the story forward, but more importantly, keeping them fresh in the audience's mind and trying to help us care about these characters. So in episode 1 and now here in episode 2, Misarya continues to be better than her season 1 portrayal. Seriously, that accent in season 1 always felt so distracting, and I've said this before, but I can't overstate how big of a difference that makes for the audience as far as connecting to her. I also think Misarya went from a position of some power at the end of season 1 to a place that now shows her more humbled, at least a little bit. She expresses to Rhaenyra essentially that she has been played multiple times by Daemon, and now she's also been played by Otto Hightower. At least that's what she thinks. I like that Rhaenyra doesn't seem to trust her, nor does Rhaenyra fully understand what exactly Misarya wants, or how her motives could complement or contradict her own. Now, if you notice that every time Misarya shows up, it brings the audience's attention back to the small folk, and we also get some more insight to Misarya. She states how she came to Westeros with nothing, and through scraping by, patiently becoming a person more powerful men could confide in, as well as sacrificing her body, she gained worth and value. She created her own home. When she speaks of how the Hightowers she assumes burned her home, and she groups Otto and Daemon together, it almost directly confronts the audience with the struggle of the small folk. And when she says she will never be accepted by those in power, it speaks to the bigger conversation of how the small folk aren't just rejected in this war among kings and queens, but they are truly neglected. They don't matter. We'll come back to this in a second, but that does transition us well into the next scene and even the next, because we get another small moment with Adam of Hall as he sees a dragon fly over. I believe that is sea smoke, but correct me in the comments if I'm mistaken. This episode gives us a constant stream of insights to the small folk, Hugh the Hammer, Adam and Alan, Misarya, and the next scene that drives home this plot point that Game of Thrones seemed to only tease but never truly lean into, and that plot point is the small folk, and this is emphasized with the hanging of the rat catchers. Hearing the actual citizens of King's Landing crying for their uncles, brothers, fathers, and sons, there is an emotional agony House of the Dragon does not allow the audience to forget. This story is demanding that we show the innocent bystanders our attention. One thing that truly makes Jaehaerys' funeral progress so impactful is that regardless of status, death and grief touches everyone, and showing that even King Aegon can fall victim to tragedy truly can make him sympathetic not only to us watching at home, but for the population of regular people that Aegon is tasked with ruling over. Unfortunately for Aegon and Rhaenyra both, serving the realm has not been a priority. The blockade mentioned in episode 1 when Aegon held court with the Smallfolk is a direct result of the Blacks, and ultimately this is merely burdensome to the Greens, but a dire situation for the Smallfolk. Their economy has been compromised, disrupting their entire ecosystem. However, the conflict has become much more personal for Aegon, and because of his anger and personal loss, Aegon took an irrational measure to be sure he killed the rat catcher that participated in the murder of his son. To be sure he actually killed Cheese, and unable to identify the suspect, Aegon ordered all rat catchers hanged for all to see. This destroys the sympathy and good faith of the small folk, and while this is not clear to Aegon, the significance of the public display is not lost on Otto Hightower. This scene is why people are calling Otto the MVP of the episode, and it'd be really difficult to disagree. Otto has been patient with all but Daemon Targaryen, and as we've watched the Hand of the King manipulate situations to not only have his daughter wed to Viserys, but he also conspired to place Aegon on the throne. He has been calculated and rationally plotted every move on the behalf of the Greens and the Hightowers to further their house and the Hightower name. Throughout all of this, it has required a measured demeanor, but it is now that Otto has had enough. He scolds Aegon, a young man stricken with grief and wounded pride. Otto never outright says he thinks Rhaenyra or Aemon or anyone else would be better, but when he directly states that the realm is the poor after the death of Viserys, and actually expresses admiration for his former king, we're watching Otto implicitly concede that his scheme to crown Aegon has been far more consequential than he had planned. And he curses Aegon with the most articulate criticisms that we have heard since the Lannisters sparring among each other with dialogue back in the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. And when Aegon states that Criston Cole has taken action, it became the final straw. While I don't think Otto truly believed that he'd be fired as Hand, when it happens, there is a moment that Otto's expression almost says, of course, this foolish child would remove his very best political advisor. And you can criticize Otto all you want, but his political maneuvering kept him in power from the old King Jaehaerys through Viserys and up until now. He's placed himself as father of a queen and grandfather to a king, a queen, and multiple princes. If the Game of Thrones is to achieve power, it's impossible to deny his ability. He is simply just a second son after all. I mean, I really can't say enough about this scene. Otto outright calls Aegon an idiot, and when Criston Cole steps in and says, "Beware how you speak to your king," Otto, portrayed by Rhys Ifans, goes off on a scene many consider Emmy Award winning. Otto snaps back that the king is my grandson, and my grandson is a fool. It's like everything Otto has wanted to say to everyone all the time from the very first episode in season 1. This character has reserved himself for so long and it finally blows up. I can't break down every line, but these intimate scenes with the levels of tonality hit their impacts perfectly. This is Game of Thrones. It is now and always was a political drama, and scenes just like this is what propelled Game of Thrones to historic heights, even when it reduced itself to spectacle and unnatural plot subversions. Aegon thinks of Criston Cole sending Arik to Dragonstone pretending to be his twin brother is brilliant. Not knowing what the truth actually is, Criston Cole is just feeling guilty for having sex with Aegon's mother while Jaehaerys was murdered. And Criston's plot to send Sir Arik away is really just his way to project his own guilt and really just a conclusion of an irrational confrontation between Cole and Sir Arik. However, I think Aegon wants to appear strong and decisive, almost giving himself credit for Cole's plan. And I love this line when Aegon has relieved Otto as Hand, and Otto says, "You wouldn't dare." Something about Aegon saying, "I have dared, and I find it stimulating." I think it is perfect for what is happening. Aegon in season 1 couldn't care less for ruling, but now that it's personal, something vengeful has awakened within him, and what's alarming is that Aegon finds it stimulating. There's a ton you can say about this scene, but this video is about the whole episode, so we do need to move on. But I like where we go from here. So Rhaenyra meets with Misarya again to inform her that she will be set free. I think it speaks a bit to Rhaenyra's honor, as she believes Daemon has granted Misarya a promise, and as the leader of her house, Rhaenyra is compelled to honor this promise. I think in this moment, Misarya may be surprised that Rhaenyra is willing to honor Daemon's promise, and I'm not sure, but the moment does suggest Misarya sees Rhaenyra as something different than what she sees in all other people of power. This idea is given additional credibility when, before she takes passage to leave Dragonstone, Misarya spots Ser Arik heading toward the castle. The scene is very suggestive that Misarya will inform someone of the situation. Now, once inside, we get a miniature spy movie as Ser Arik navigates the hallways and avoids his brother, and I kind of like this nod to older spy cinema, but the real moment is when Ser Arik enters Rhaenyra's apartment, and I love that he does say that he has no choice. But that's the thing, the fight with the Cargyll twins, which I think is just fine, it's great. Actually, is choreographed really well. It's more than what we see on the screen though. Everyone actually does have a choice, but they're choosing a side in a conflict that has no personal bearing mostly, especially the small folk. But with Eric and Arik, they hold just one disagreement and it means death for one of them. And yet, they're killing each other to serve a purpose of others. It's tragic, and it is symbolic of the greater theme that this episode has been communicating. The selfish acts of others constantly harms the otherwise innocent. Ser Arik has no bloodlust for Rhaenyra, and certainly not for his brother, and neither have anything to gain regardless of which side they stand. They're devoted to their vows to the Kingsguard, and that's it. But as Ser Arik stated to Daemon, they serve and protect the royal family, but who do they serve and protect when the family fights each other? Even without focusing on the small folk, the consequence for each decision seems to fall upon the shoulders of anyone but the person responsible. Aemon kills Luke, and yet Jaehaerys is murdered for it, punishing Helaena and Aegon, with the grief that would be better suited for Aemon, accident or not. Daemon sought revenge, but it was at the cost of the people of King's Landing viewing Rhaenyra as a villain and a false queen. These themes run consistent, and those victimized respond in a way that ultimately repeats this pattern. The episode ends in King's Landing with Alicent meeting with Otto, both naive enough to believe that a peaceful future is possible, or so they say. Alicent believes that she can still persuade Aegon, but I think the dragon in Aegon has been awakened. We last see Alicent go to check on Aegon, and while in tears, Alicent does not choose to console him. It makes Aegon seem much more sympathetic, because he is so alone with all of this. His father didn't want him to be king, his father really didn't show him any attention or love at all, and when Aegon tries to almost redeem this situation between him and his own father, as he tries to make a greater connection between himself and his son Jaehaerys, his son is killed. This dragon inside of him may truly have been awakened, but he's in a situation he was never prepared for, that he never imagined for himself, and he doesn't know what to do. Add in the grief, and Aegon is truly lost and alone. Alicent before this wanted to confess her sins to Otto, or to anyone, but Otto doesn't wish to hear it, so Alicent is stuck with the conflict of guilt and desire, and to confront this, Criston Cole has come to her room. Criston Cole is the source for both of these emotions, and in a strange way, they both feel the exact same. I get that Criston is probably the most hated in the show so far, but these moments that he has of projection and deflecting his guilt, like we saw with his interaction with Ser Arik, are human. When we watch that gaslighting moment, we recognize it. We even understand it. I don't know that Cole will be given a redemption arc, and I don't necessarily know if that is best for the character. But there are speckles of remorse when he watched the scene of Jaehaerys' murder being cleaned up. Is it a redeeming moment? No, but it is relatable. It is human, and as much as you, me, and everyone else dislike him, I'm full of anticipation to see where this character goes, as well as Alicent, as they seem tied to a similar guilty desire trap. And this is making these characters vulnerable. And that's really how I feel about every character that we experienced in this episode. Something vulnerable showed up for just about everyone, even in the smallest scenes. Aemon confesses his regret for what happened with Lucerys. Baela and Jace have a transparent conversation where we get a glimpse at how Daemon's daughter might view him very negatively, and even though Baela could be conflicted about this situation, she brings up Harwin Strong, Jace's real father. And yet there's this unity with the Blacks outside of Daemon that we don't see with the Greens in these moments. The conflict last season with Driftmark could have turned Baela against Rhaenyra's children, but it didn't. There's an understanding. I've heard people criticize these moments, but this is character development. I said I'd tell you whether I agree if this is the best episode or not so far for House of the Dragon, and well, yeah, I think this was a perfect episode. Not that it was flawless at every turn, nothing is, but perfect in its entirety. It checks all of the boxes. A thing maybe we don't realize at first is how well glued together each scene is. There's not a single scene that doesn't segue into the next very naturally. Each scene is relevant to the last, and they all offer something necessary for the plot, while leaning into the details that breathe story into these events that we only read as bullet points in Fire and Blood. And it does this by focusing on character, really propping itself up on scenes between just a couple characters in a room, scheming or arguing politics. Daemon and Rhaenyra at first, but then the marvelous scene between Aegon and Otto, and Criston Cole can't be denied in that scene either. He doesn't say much, but his presence is significant. Obviously, he's named Hand of the King. Realizing that Misarya is a real character with prior ambitions that have been destroyed, and allowing her to give a more humbled outlook of the rise and fall for small folk. And yes, the small folk's relevance can't be understated here at all. These are real people paying the price for this family feud that they have no relation to. The Cargyll twins is this huge moment, but what hit harder in my view is the scene that establishes this as an inevitable moment. Criston Cole and Sir Ark would have been my favorite scene in a lot of the other episodes, but it's overshadowed by other even better scenes, specifically Rhaenyra and Daemon, and then Otto and Aegon. I love this episode, and it is, in my opinion, the best so far from House of the Dragon. It's close. Episode 8 in Season 1, I think I'm going to get a lot of pushback of people saying that episode, and I understand, but you let me know what you think. Look, I hope you guys enjoyed my overview and perspective on Episode 2, and if you missed my Episode 1 review, you can watch that right here.